What comes to mind when you think of a prison? Is it the cells, the barbed wire fences surrounding the yard, or the mean and vicious guards? Notice how whatever you thought of all had some sort of negative connotation along with it. And why do you think it is? Looking at what we know about most prisons today, most U.S. federal prisons are overcrowded, dirty, and a safety concern. Today, I want to highlight this issue and draw the correlation between poor prison conditions and why we should be gearing our focus more towards rehabilitation for specific inmates. In this, we will see how rehabilitation prisons are more likely to prevent reincarceration, provide a safer environment inside and outside of the prison, and lastly, how it is a better use of the allocation of our prison funding. For starters, let's look up on the facts. Rehabilitation prisons are institutions that were made for equipping and reforming and equipping inmates with the proper skills and education to be stable citizens back into society. If we look at the big picture, the US is considered to be behind on developing these sorts of institutions. They sit at one of the, or for example, Norway has already seen a drastic decrease in the recidivism rates, while they sit at one of the lowest rates in the world, sitting at 20%. On the other side of the scale, we have the US with the rate of 45%. This is one of the highest rates in the world. This means that almost half of inmates that end up in jail will reoffend and end up back in jail after their first sentence. This is according to First Step Alliance, which also mentions the key to Norway's success. Prisoners in Norway lose their liberty, but they don't lose their humanity and dignity. This shows that prisoners in Norway are still treated with respect as they take steps to overcome mental health illnesses, receive an education, and take steps to learn to live life free of addiction. Of course, some may wonder the price of such institutions and how we will be able to afford it, but I assure you that it will all be worth it in the end. Plus, we'll talk more about this later. Let's not bail out just yet as we learn more about as we uncover more about the safety of not just the prisons, but also our society as a whole. A big advantage that rehabilitation prisons have over federal prisons is that there are a lot less fewer violent outbreaks, abuse, or just overall injustices going on. The negligence of safety in our federal prison system is vile, and it is much more apparent when comparing it to a rehabilitation prison. A small example of this is the hundreds of federal prisons workers that were caught and convicted of doing such crimes such as sexual violence, abuse, and just overall smuggling and just overall corruption. AP News talks about some crimes specific to a small federal prison in Dublin, California. This is where many prison workers were caught of doing crimes such as sexual violence, abuse, and just more overall corruption. This is just a small piece of the puzzle. As we can see, there are a lot more crimes that go unreported and unnoticed. This should open our eyes. How are we as a country tossing criminals into underfunded, overcrowded, and surrounding them with corruption in prisons, and still wondering why the crime rates are so high once they have reached life outside of prison? As we can see, the problem runs deeper, and if we begin to shift focus more towards rehabilitation, then maybe we can start seeing improvements outside of the prison and taking preventative measures to even more crimes. Before we reach the final verdict, let's hear more about the long-term financial advantages of a rehabilitation prison has over federal prisons. As mentioned earlier, there is a lot of worry about the costs of funding such programs and how we'll be using taxpayer money to afford programs for rehabilitation. Lots will agree that using taxpayer money is going on the delinquents of society is a waste, and we should be putting money more towards more important projects, such as education, roads, or just other social projects. However, I believe that putting money towards prison will solve all this problem, and it will only greatly improve our economy. The Center for American Progress has shown that recidivism, which is the term used to describe criminals that end up back in jail, decreases our GDP by $65 billion a year. This is because we are putting more and more money into housing the criminals that end up in jail multiple times. Well, we should be focused, while instead we should be focused on equipping them to be useful to society. America already faces an overcrowding problem in the prisons, and we can be putting that money instead of putting that money into building bigger prisons and hiring more security. We could be putting that money towards rehabilitation programs in the prisons, so the prisoners can live stable lives and put that money back into the economy. This will break off the cycle of prisoners ending up back in jail and putting them into the cycle of living the and moving on past their life in prison and leading better lives. As we finish off this sentence, we line up what we have gone over today. We have seen that rehabilitation prisons are more likely to prevent reincarceration, provide a safer life inside of prisons, not just inside of our prisons, but also to our society, and how is a better use of the funding that we get from the US to put in our prisons. My goal for this speech is for you to redefine what you define as our prison standards and look past the cells, the barbed wire fences, and the guards. And I hope that one day we can restore hope into our prisoners. In this, we can see the humanity in giving the prisoners a second chance and restoring hope back into the people that once led a successful life. Hopefully, then they can move past hopefully then they can receive a second chance to live out their life to the fullest potential. Thank you.